Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Welcome in, one and all, to another edition of the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and Jimmy's and Joe's. I'm Trey Reeves. I'm here with Mitch Mason and Garrett Turney. And fellas, it is the last conference preview episode of the 2024 preseason. We're recording this just 6 days away from the opening of the college football season. How we feeling, fellas? 6 days away. I know the slate's not great next Saturday. It's not as exciting as maybe the last couple of years on week 0, but we got real life football on the screen this week.
I don't know what you're talking about. Not exciting. We get Georgia Tech, who's going to score all the points, and FSU, who returns like nobody from last year, in Ireland playing college football. That is maybe the perfect amuse-bouche to what is going to be a fantastic college football season. It's been a long, dark offseason. No change there. But I think this year, with all the work that we put into our preseason previews, writing actual full-length previews for almost every single team on our Substack, really pumping out quality content on YouTube as well. The interviews that we did, I'm excited for it to all pay off and to get into the season because I feel like we're so invested in like all of these teams. Just the work that we've done this year, I think is a lot of fun. And I cannot wait to experience this football season after putting all of that work in.
Yeah, we're definitely on the precipice. We're just about there. I kind of feel like I'm like Zac Efron or Corbin Bleu at the beginning of High School Musical 2, just going like summer, 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 except I'm just like college football, college football, college football. I'm so excited. You can see the hours ticking away, the minutes ticking away. And yeah, we're almost there. Like week 0, it's always kind of a little bit of a weak slate, but we get like a good game maybe too. So, you know, I'm kind of excited for that. And then yeah, we're here, we're into it, we're talking games. No more talking season. We're done with that.
Come for the G5 analysis. Stay for the references to late 2000s TV movies. That's what you get.
Not all that late. 17 years ago, according to a tweet I saw recently, this movie came out. So that makes you feel a little bit old.
Why did you say that?
Yeah.
We were having a good time, and
which unfortunately means that the first one is greater than 17 years ago by some numbers. So
Yep. We were having a good time.
So you really, you come for the college football, you stay for the High School Musical references, and even more for those weird like existential moments where you start to think about the passage of time and how it's all coming to an end.
I just realized this week because of a reel on Instagram that they really did the theater kids dirty in that movie.
Yeah, they really did.
Came in and took over their favorite thing. And we don't have to review that whole movie. We got a bunch of movies to talk about.
That's for another pod.
Yeah, next offseason we'll do a deep dive on that. But guys, we're talking about the Mountain West, Pac-2, and the Sun Belt, Fun Belt tonight. Mitch, we're going to start with your teams. You're in charge of the rundown on the Mountain West. You've kind of broken the teams into tiers as we head into the season. Take us through what you're thinking. Who are the top teams, middle teams, maybe ones that should be already planning for 2025?
There's a couple at each stop this year. Well, I'm excited to kick off the potluck episode. Truly a one-come-all situation here. Mountain West is going to be a lot of fun because I think the majority of the conference could beat anybody else in the conference on just about every week. There's a couple of cellar dwellers that I don't know will do anything, but there's enough what I term night terrors in this conference that they might be really spicy half teams that I don't want to see on the road, like Wyoming, for instance. I mean, they're just famous for tearing apart your hopes and dreams when you go up to Laramie. So we'll get into them in a second, but I think that there's a lot to like around this conference. There are some fun players that either transferred in or did not transfer out. We've got a number of new head coaches, a lot of storylines in the Mountain West. And I think this is generally a conference that flies under the radar in the national landscape because outside of like Boise State, they tend to kind of beat each other up. And so you don't normally have a playoff contender or, a New Year's Six bowl contender if it's not the Broncos. This year, I think that could potentially be a little bit different. So we'll start with the contenders. Boise State is the favorite. They're the returning champion from last year. It's a new head coach who's taking over, though, in Spencer Danielson. After they fired Andy Avalos at 5-5. Really, the decision was made when the Broncos were 4-5. Broncos then win 4 straight. They win the conference championship. They do lose their bowl game. But this year, with Talon Green transferring away, he goes to Arkansas to join Bobby Petrino. There's a quarterback opening. And we all thought, Trey, you wrote the preview, assuming Malachi Nelson, the former 5-star who transfers in from USC, would win the job. And then maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before we hit record on this show, it's Maddox Madsen, the guy that took over for Talon Green last season, who actually beats out Nelson to earn that starting job. I believe they play Georgia Southern to open the season. So right away, I've seen a lot of reaction from Boise State fans where some of them are disappointed that's how the battle went. Some of them are fully trusting in the coaching staff and their valuation. Madsen was not useless last year when he took over. He beat out Talon Green, who really struggled in the middle portion of their schedule. Again, they were 4-5. Offense wasn't doing a lot. Defense certainly wasn't helping their cause. Think the Oregon game where, they showed some flash, but ultimately it was just a team that at times felt overmatched, that felt a little lost schematically, right? So Avalos is fired. He's now at TCU as the defensive coordinator. But this Boise State team, I think, is one that can be a whole lot of fun. Ashton Jeanty is the name to know, one of the top running backs in the country. I don't care what classification, what conference. Ashton was coveted by every single program in this country when he decided to enter the transfer portal. But after talking with the coaching staff and really thinking about what he wanted to do with his future, he returns to the Smurf turf. And I think him by himself, he's going to be worth at least a couple of wins for this Broncos schedule. I love what they're doing potentially offensively with who they're bringing back. They lost Eric McAllister, who's their leading wide receiver from last season. He also transferred to TCU, but they've got some fun guys out wide. Guys, remember Chris Marshall, former 5-star who was at Texas A&M and then had to go the JUCO route with academics? Yeah, he's now at Boise State, and the clips from fall camp of his look phenomenal. So Boise State, I think, is absolutely one that we've got to know. Their schedule, I think, is interesting. They certainly have a non-conference showdown with Oregon in week 2. They're at Oregon, but as Oregon supporters will let you know, they really struggle against, or the Ducks struggle against the Broncos historically. So, not saying that an upset's going to happen, but just watch that. They have Washington State in week 4. At UNLV is the interesting game to me. That's October 26th. I'll talk about the Rebs in just a second. And then they go to Wyoming late in the season. They've got Oregon State to close it out. So they avoid not UNLV. The next team, Fresno State. They avoid Fresno State, which is huge. I don't believe they play Air Force either. Those are kind of two of the next 4 teams that most people pick out of the Mountain West. So, Boise State, they've got some veterans back on the defensive side, on the line, and in the secondary. I think this is probably most people's favorite coming out of the conference, and I think it's going to be one of those teams, certainly we mentioned, as one of the G5 favorites to make the playoff.
Yeah, they have the schedule to make a push for a good resume for the playoff in my mind. That Oregon game you mentioned, if they can just keep it close, that'll be a huge victory, and they're not going to get punished for losing that game if they do happen to lose it. But they do also get both of the former Pac-12 teams, the Pac-2 teams, at home this year. That's a good opportunity for some really solid wins there in Boise. I like how it sets up. I'm interested to see how the quarterback situation plays out. Like you said, I wrote my whole preview under the pretense that it would be Malachi Nelson, because why would you not start the former #1 overall recruit that you just happen to fall into your lap in the transfer portal? But coaches know better than I do. They're at practice every single day.
Right.
And if Maddox Madsen is the guy and going to be the clear, better option, you trust it and you roll with it. And I don't think that he's going to be the mainstay on that offense. Like you mentioned, it's going to be Ashton Gentry who that offense is going to run through for the most part. Mitch, you mentioned the new coach at Boise State who took over last year, but new first-time head coach this year. UNLV is the only team in the top of the conference that has continuity from the head coach position last year.
Yeah, Barry Odom's back, and he retains Brennan Marion, who's the architect of that go-go offense from a season ago. They will have a new quarterback after the heart and soul, really, of that team, and the young gunslinger and Jaden Mayava transfers to USC. But as a lot of other previews kind of allude to, there aren't many teams that lose their quarterback, that lose some pieces up front along the offensive line, and yet you're projecting them to maybe even be stronger the next season. But that's what a lot of people are projecting with the Rebels. Now, they've got two options at quarterback. Malik Williams comes in from Campbell. He was a December transfer, if I'm not mistaken. So he was there for spring ball. Matthew Sluka comes over from Holy Cross. He's kind of quarterback option number 2. Originally, I thought Sluka would be the guy that would come in and win that job. But from what I've read, it's Malik Williams who seems like he's going to be the starter. He seems to have a little bit better grasp on the offense. The knock on Sluka is he holds the ball a little too much. He looks to make plays with his feet rather than just trusting in his arm, and he will turn the football over sometimes. So in a fast tempo offense, Malik Williams, who comes over from Campbell, he might really be the total package there. He's thrown to Ricky White III, who's one of the best wide receivers, again, in the country, not just at the G5 level, but he was really fun to watch a season ago for the running Rebs. They've got speed all across the offensive line, a couple returners up front. The question for me will be the defense. The defense really struggled at times last year. They were 103rd defense in the country. They were 111th in defending the pass. They forced 27 turnovers, but a lot of the times that aggressiveness really bit them. They ended up giving up over almost 29 points per game. So live by the fast tempo offense, the aggressive style offense, you die by that same offense. I think a little bit of maybe the Cal syndrome, where they were going so fast on offense. If they didn't have a sustained drive, that defense maybe got hung out to dry a little bit. But this is a very talented team. I mentioned Boise State has to come to them. I think this is a game that the Rebels could win. Once again, they did lose to Boise State in the conference championship game, but I really think there's a good chance that the Rebels defend home field. Again, they've also got an interesting schedule at Houston and at Kansas. 2 of their first 3 games. I think we're going to learn a lot from the Rebels in that non-conference schedule. They've got Syracuse 2 weeks later, Fresno State sandwiched in between them. So it could be a rocky start for UNLV, which is one of the reasons that I do not have the Rebs as a G5 playoff contender. I just think they absorb too many losses early. But when we're talking about the conference championship run, I think this is a team that is going to go stride for stride with Boise State. I think is probably that next tier up above just about everybody else in the conference.
Yeah. How close do you think Fresno State is to matching that too? You're talking about good offense. Fresno State probably going to have a pretty good offense as well. You're talking about the first 2 teams obviously being stride for stride. You know, Mikey Keene, a little bit of extra experience here. What do you think Fresno State can do?
I think Fresno State would have been a contender for the conference title if Jeff Tedford was still there, right? He had to step back. Second time he's had to do this at Fresno because of his health situation. And I think a lot of people assume this is for good, that Tedford will retire. And we've seen the last of him on a sideline, which is just so tragic. I mean, Tedford's one of the best coaches in the country. He knows what he's doing. He's won 2 conference titles at Fresno State. I believe he played for 5 others in the Mountain West. So a guy who's used to having his squad up there at the top. Garrett, you mentioned the offense. The offense should be a lot of fun once again. Mikey Keene really developed last year, found his stride after transferring in from Central Florida. I don't think a lot of questions exist on the offense. The defense was trending in a concerning direction. Under Jeff Tedford, the Fresno State Bulldogs were best known for that defense, that stingy sub 20 point a game kind of defense. It crept over that mark for the first time in their championship contending window in a little while. I believe they were allowing almost 24 points a game, which isn't absurd necessarily, but in those big games, last year they went 9-4. In those biggest games, their defense let them down a little bit. So for me, Fresno State absolutely is one of the ring me championship contenders. I am concerned that a defense that doesn't return a ton at any one level, with plus the late absence of Jeff Tedford, I just wonder if this team is searching for an identity a little bit towards the middle of the season. At Michigan to start. Their conference schedule isn't terrible to start. They do go on the road at UNLV to end September. They'll take on Washington State. They do not play Oregon State. And then they really don't have a challenging game after that until probably Colorado State at home November 23rd. They end the year at UCLA, which seems like a really weird season finale to go out of conference for that. But Fresno State, I think if they are contending, it's because the offense continued to develop. The defense got back to its normal regimen, and this schedule doesn't scare me, certainly not in conference.
Well, that's correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's the last team that you kind of had in the top tier. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. I slipped Wyoming to the second tier, which we can talk about here. And I think so. This second tier is the Night Terrors tier. This is the tier that I don't want to see on my schedule on a Saturday night. I'm going on the road. My team maybe is in a look ahead situation. Maybe we've got a big conference game coming up. I don't want to see any of these four teams on the slate. Colorado State, Air Force, Hawaii, and Wyoming make up my Night Terrors team. And we can start with Cowboys. Cowboys also seeking a new head coach. Craig Bohl retires, right? So they've got Jay Salvell that steps up. He was the defensive coordinator under Bohl. And Wyoming is known for their defense. That plain and simple. They want to tear you apart defensively. Offensively, they haven't really thrown the ball all that well since Josh Allen left Laramie. Now, what's interesting is Evan Svoboda, who's the new starting quarterback, he chose to wear number 17, Josh Allen's old number, I guess trying to kind of awaken those vibes. But Wyoming, I think, is hoping that they have the pieces, the weapons to be more dangerous in the passing game. They've got a couple of speedy transfers that are coming in. Really good stable of running backs. That's what Wyoming does, right? They grind you down on the ground. So I don't know that I see enough proven explosiveness out of this Wyoming team to fully buy in. They were the 78th scoring offense a season ago, just over 25 points a game. When you're telling me they've got to beat the likes of Boise State and UNLV and maybe Fresno State, those teams just feel a tier above as far as complete team and certainly offensive firepower. I love the defense. The defense should be fun again. They replace a handful of guys, but overall it's a pretty veteran unit coming back. So defensive-minded head coach. He's got a number of his guys who are very familiar with his scheme. I think Wyoming's a very dangerous team once again.
Just one more thing on them. I love their schedule. I think that's what was the tiebreaker to me. I was kind of between the top tier and the second tier, like you were when I was writing up a preview of the Mountain West. I love the schedule. They get Air Force and Boise State at home. The rest of the conference schedule is a lot of teams I project towards the bottom. San Diego State, San Jose State, Utah State, New Mexico. Trip to Colorado State will be difficult. That's a big rivalry game up there. But and then they close the season at Washington State, which could be tough depending on what the Cougars have. We'll talk about them later in the episode. But I do love how the schedule sets up, and their defense will travel to those road games. But take me through the rest of that tier. It's a lot of half teams, like you mentioned with Wyoming. Who else do you have in that second tier?
So Colorado State might be the most fun team in the conference. I think it's either going to be
Colorado State.
I think it's either going to be Colorado State or Hawaii. We'll talk about the Rainbow Warriors in just a second. But just from a pure vibe standpoint, heck yeah, man. Turn on Colorado State, late night Mountain West action since Pac-12 After Dark is dead. And I really think that Colorado State has a chance to be fun. Now, their schedule sucks. It is brutal. But this offense keeps Torrey Horton, who's one of the best wide receivers in the country. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but the Mountain West sneakily retained a lot of like guys that would go to a Power 4 school now and everybody would know their name. They would be the star on campus. But because they stayed at a smaller group of 5 school, again, specifically a Mountain West school, I feel like a lot of college football fans don't know who some of these guys are. And Torrey Horton is one of those guys. He was with Jay Norvell at Nevada. Now he followed him to Colorado State, and all he's done is catch touchdowns. The Rams are going to sling it through the air. There's no doubt about that. Braden Fowler Nicolosi can put up big yards. He's going to throw a couple to the other team, and that's certainly what the danger is for Colorado State. But the offense, I think, should be a lot of fun. I mentioned the schedule, though. The schedule absolutely sucks, and why they're not a contender for me. So let's just run through it. At Texas, you get Northern Colorado at home, UTEP at Oregon State, San Jose State at Air Force, New Mexico at Nevada, Wyoming at Fresno State, Utah State. They miss Boise and UNLV, but I feel like there's no runway. There's no place where I look at their schedule and go, that's where they get a couple weeks of momentum. This is a team that when I went down, even though I think I'm higher on them than maybe some of the others in the national landscape, I think getting to a bowl game is a big victory here on this schedule. And so 6-6, 7-5, I think you are really celebrating up in Fort Collins.
I want to make a quick little comment on them because I really like this team a lot. I think this team is a little bit underrated, a little bit of a sleeper team this year. It is true that Fowler Nicolosi likes to throw picks. That's true. But that was true for his freshman year. I'm really curious to see what it means to have a whole nother year in the offseason, looking at things, letting the game slow down a little bit, because statistically, he outpassed a bunch of different guys. They ended up with the number 9 passing offense in the country, and they only added to that. Goffney's another good piece in that room, and then they added Donovan Ollie from Cincinnati, and he's a big-time wide receiver as well that's going to contribute. So you probably got like 3 really, really stud wide receivers in that room to throw to as well. It takes some of the pressure off of Torrey Horton, let him do his thing. I really think this is one of those. Yes, they're a half team. Like the defense really isn't all that good. They do bring a bunch of guys back, but it's not like you're bringing back a bunch of studs, right? There's some good pieces, but it's not like they're all that good. But this is a team that took Colorado to 2 overtimes in their house, and now they're getting to play Colorado at their house, which is kind of a rare occurrence. They don't play in Fort Collins too much, so I think this could be one of those where Colorado State might jump up and kind of surprise you at the end of the season with their ability to score and just kind of find a way to outscore a bunch of teams. We've seen it happen. I think this is one of those teams that could do it.
Well, take us through the rest of those half teams, Mitch. You teased Hawaii. Is there any reason I should stay up way past my bedtime to watch the Rainbow Warriors this year?
Tell you what, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Find a little Flow Sports stream. Braden Shagers out there slinging it on the islands. Local product here out of Dallas, Texas. I think Timmy Chang finally has some continuity on offense. I don't think they're going to be floundering helplessly. I think that was it the veer and shoot, right, that they run. I think that's going to be popping off this season. I think Hawaii's going to score a lot of points. I don't know if they're going to be able to stop anybody. They're replacing almost everybody in the front 7. There is some continuity on the secondary, which I think will help. But Hawaii's never exactly been a defensive juggernaut anyway. I think they were something like 72nd, I think, in total. But they were better at stopping the pass last year than stopping the run. They were kind of cheesecloth against the run, and teams didn't really have to throw on the Rainbow Warriors last year to beat them. So 5-8 a season ago, because they had that 13th game, the Hawaii travel rule and whatnot after going to Vanderbilt. But yeah, I don't know if a path to a bowl game is necessarily there. I don't know if I would bet on it. But I think they're going to win maybe a game or two that nobody expected Hawaii to. That when you wake up the next morning and you check ESPN, you go, Hawaii won that. I think that's on the cards for Timmy Chang's gang this year.
I'm looking up their Vegas win total right now because I want to say it was 5.5, and I might be crazy for that, but bowl game might not. Yeah, it's 5.5 on FanDuel right now, and it's dead even minus 110 over and under. So making a bowl game might not be so far-fetched for Hawaii. I don't know. Anybody else in that tier, Mitch? Are you ready to move on to the next one?
Air Force. Air Force is also in this tier.
You,
yeah, just very quickly, Air Force is replacing their quarterback. Zach Larrier is finally gone. He's out of eligibility. They are replacing, I've forgotten exactly how many starters, but it's equal to the largest overhaul of a team that Troy Calhoun has ever had in his illustrious career at Air Force. So continuity, obviously, in the triple option is very important. I think the defense hopefully is going to be able to step up this year. They were the second ranked rushing offense last year, and they started 8-0. I mean, folks forget that the Falcons started 8-0. They looked like a shoo-in to not only win the Mountain West and be the conference champion, but also maybe threaten, well, I guess had they gone undefeated, they would have easily been the New Year's Six bowl representative from the group of five. And, who knows? We were kind of dreaming about an Air Force playoff selection. And then they lost 4 straight. Zach Larrier went down. They weren't able to replace him effectively. So I'm a little bit concerned about just assuming that Air Force picks up the pieces and is the same old Air Force team that we're used to. John Busha is the starting quarterback there. He's just not as fast as Larrier, and nobody is. Larrier was a all conference champion in track. So kind of tough to replace that. Jack Curtis is one guy I'll highlight. Kid from Texas not the University of Texas, just the state. 6'5" off the edge. They're really excited about what he offers in both the run and the pass rush. So if Air Force can get the defense together and figure out how to consistently move the football in the post Zach Larrier era, I think this is a team that can be dangerous for sure. Again, they're in my night terrors level, not the conference championship contender. But at the end of the day, like if you told me Air Force was right there at the end of November, I wouldn't be shocked.
Well, let's go through. Yeah, it's interesting to see Air Force because 134th out of 134 FBS teams in returning production. But if you're looking for a bright side, they do avoid both Boise State and UNLV on the schedule. So maybe an opportunity to rack up some wins if they can get everything gelled. Mitch, let's go quickly through the rest of the conference. You can frame it however you want. You want to look for bright spots. You want to doom scroll, whatever you want to do. Go for it for the rest of these teams.
Yeah, so there's 2 more tiers here. We've got the Pacific Avenue teams, which when I was thinking, what do these teams kind of represent in my mind? I thought of a monopoly board. Basically, I think Utah State and San Diego State are 2 teams that are hopping around the board. They're rolling their dice. They're moving their piece. And they're hoping that the next time around, they land on that final spot to create a block, right? To lock out Pacific Avenue and start building hotels on it. Utah State got victimized by this Blake Anderson scandal. Now they've lost their head coach. They've lost a number of their key contributors. Micah Davis was the feature player in a lot of preview magazines for the Aggies. He's transferred out. A lot of instability at Utah State. It was going to be, my question for Utah State was going to be, can the offense do anything this year? They've decided to cast their lot with Spencer Petras as their starting quarterback. Iowa quarterback, for those that are unfamiliar, and that historic offense from the last several years. So, was it the scheme? Was it the quarterback? Was it a little bit of both? I guess watch Utah State Aggie football to figure out. But I'm not particularly confident in what the Aggies are going to put on the field. San Diego State, Trey, you wrote in their preview, it was just kind of like an unceremonious fall from grace. And it was just really, really fast. They went from winning double-digit games to, I believe they won 7 games 2 seasons ago, and then they won 4 games last year. The offense has been putrid lately, and the defense just didn't get enough support to kind of keep themselves in games. In comes Sean Lewis over from Colorado after he was fired mid-season essentially by Prime. Remember, he left Kent State to come to as the head coach. He led Kent State to one of their best seasons in program history, goes to be the offensive coordinator at Colorado, and then he and Prime don't see eye to eye. Prime didn't love the way that he was using Shedeur for his draft value. And so he just sidelines him mid-season. So I'm glad that Lewis is out from under that toxic environment. He's going to try and rebuild the Aztec program from the ground up offensively. They could be fun in the next couple of years, but this is not the year for them to be competitive. The final tier contains 3 teams, and I titled this "Your Next College Football 25 Dynasties." It's Nevada, New Mexico, and San Jose State. All 3 have new head coaches this year. All 3 really, really struggle offensively. San Jose State was the best of those 3 from a season ago, and they've got a wide receiver that I really like in Nick Nash, but they just lost so much production from that bowl team a season ago, and they lose Brett Brennan to Arizona. They lost a lot of key contributors to Arizona as well. In comes Ken Niumatalolo, who's sadly not going to run the triple option in San Jose. I think we would have paid to see that on some late night broadcast. But yeah, I think it's going to take time for the Spartans to not only replace that production, but figure out whatever they're going to do with Niumatalolo at the head. Nevada and New Mexico, again, new head coaches. They need identities. Bronco Mendenhall returns to the game. He's in New Mexico. Trey, I think you wrote in your preview, he's led his team to a bowl game in 14 of the 17 years he's been a head coach. I can almost assure you that won't happen this year for the Lobos, but maybe a sign that they're trying to invest in their football program. They saw what New Mexico State did last year, and you clearly can win in New Mexico. It's just a matter of team building. So maybe Mendenhall can get that team back on the right foot. He did quit his horse ranch to go do that. So, I think the guy's invested.
Yeah, Bronco on a horse ranch is just perfect. But you're right. He's a good coach that knows how to win in really, really difficult situations. And that's exactly what New Mexico needs.
Exactly. I think it's going to take time, but boy, if he could do it at Virginia, why can't he do it in New Mexico and have some fun there? But yeah, that's the Mountain West.
Okay. And did you mention Nevada? I'm sorry. I might have
glossed over. There's just so much new there. I think if there's one thing to watch, it's Brennan Lewis is the quarterback, formerly of Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. Prime didn't want him, so he transferred out, and he's got another chance at Nevada. I mean, it's a really, really bad Wolfpack team. You made the joke before we hit record that if SMU doesn't blow them out in week 0 here, coming up on Saturday night, that we are really, really concerned about the Ponies. Nevada's a great team to play as on College Football 25. I don't know that there's much reason to tune into them this year.
Gotcha. Yeah, apologies for glossing over that in my ears, but that is the Mountain West. There are 2 kind of half members of the Mountain West this year that we'll talk about right now. The Pac-2 leftovers, who are just in a really unfortunate, sad, bummer situation, Oregon State and Washington State. But they have the opportunity, if they can put it together this year, to maybe make some lemonade out of some lemons. They're definitely in a difficult situation, but maybe they can rack up some wins on their schedule. Maybe they can push for a college football playoff top 25 ranking and see what happens. I don't know if a 11-0, 11-1 Pac-2 team, do they get an invite to the college football playoff? I don't know. Let's dream big. Garrett, you have these 2 teams. What'd you find when you were researching for these previews?
Yeah, man, dream big is probably the goal here for the Pac-2. And, I thought about, all these jokes I could make about, this conference really comes down to 2 teams, Oregon State and Washington State. You can really break it down. It's going to be one of those 2 that ends up on top. And, you can talk about their out-of-conference schedule, which is just about all of it. But, the unfortunate thing is I think no matter how much you want to get away from all of the off the field stuff, you really can't for these 2 teams, right? I think the kind of conversation that we're going to have about these 2 teams going forward is, how do these 2 former Power 5 teams kind of crawl their way out and put themselves back in a comfortable place with a new home? And unfortunately, they're both kind of in similar spots. I don't know which one you'd rather maybe take and try to say, yeah, we're going to rebuild this, but I want to kind of start with Oregon State. They had the better year last year, right? 8-4 in the regular season, losing the bowl game to Notre Dame. Couldn't quite pull off any of those big upsets towards the end of the season, but it was a lot of promise. And DJU seemed to be turning his career around up there. Damian Martinez just tearing things up on the ground, and then Jonathan Smith leaves his alma mater and decides he wants to go coach for Michigan State, and everybody walked out the door, and Oregon State fans just kind of left holding the bag. And they're saying, hey, the program was kind of moving the right direction. Like, what happened? Why leave now? Right. And I get it. You don't really have a conference right now, but you think from a guy who went there, you might have a little bit of loyalty. I know there's some hurt feelings. Now you got Trent Bray. He's your DC. And you're just looking to move on, right? It's just time to move on. Like I said, losing DJU, obviously, he's kind of got some up and down in his past, but really was a good quarterback for them. Kept the offense moving. Damie Martinez, a stud running back. He takes off. He's going to go be a stud in the ACC. It's really, really hard for me right now to say that you can project anything with certainty because almost everything is new for Oregon State, right? You're going to have to figure out what you're doing on offense. You got Ryan Gunderson right now at the OC. It's his first time as an offensive coordinator. Maybe he figures something out. Maybe there's something good that can go with that. And again, the defense should probably end up being pretty good. Obviously, Bray, the head coach, he was the defensive coordinator, so you should have some continuity there. But I mean, you look at the roster; it's trashed at this point. There's so many people that have left, and it's hard to think, hey, where are we going to find our bright spots? There's going to be good players. Giovanni McCoy, the quarterback, he's out of Idaho. He should be really good. You got playmakers around him. You got guys that have come in to kind of take their chance here, but man, for Oregon State, it's just hard to see how this season goes really well from a team that I think is probably dealing with a lot of the off the field stuff and dealing with a lot of the kind of motivation factor. It's a brand new culture and a lot of brand new players. So yes, there's going to be, I think, an easier schedule. I think they're going to be able to take advantage of the schedule because you are playing a lot of Mountain West teams. Kind of looking through some of that right now. I'm seeing, obviously Idaho, San Diego State. You do play Oregon. That is an out-of-conference game all of a sudden. You play Purdue. You get Colorado State, Nevada, UNLV, Cal, San Jose State, Air Force. You get your one conference game towards the end of the season against Washington State, and then you finish at Boise. There's a reason to believe there's some wins on there in a bowl game there, but I think the real question is, what do they have to do to kind of put themselves in a position so that next year they can become a little bit of a destination with the portal and maybe try to find their way through this next phase of I don't know if it's realignment. I don't know if it's just conferences acquiring teams, but they got to find a way to get back into one of these big conferences to kind of restore where they were as a program.
Trey, I love Giovanni McCoy coming over from Idaho, and just a quick correction. They play Idaho State, not Idaho. So Vandal fans, no, you don't have a 13th game on your
Idaho
schedule.
State. Yeah, there it is.
Just relax. It's the Tigers that draw. Or the Tigers, Bengals?
Bengals.
Bengals.
I really like Giovanni McCoy getting a shot at, a little bit higher of a stage. He was fun to watch at the FCS level. I'm curious what y'all have Oregon State going, because for me, I think 6-6 is kind of where I net out. It's a much more difficult schedule than I think Washington State gets.
Yeah, I don't know. Let me do some back of the napkin math here because I haven't really plotted it out yet, but I think they'll start 3-1 before the first bye week. I do think that they are definitively better, even with all the losses. I think they're definitively better than Idaho State, San Diego State, and Purdue.
Sure.
I think they will try their best against Oregon. So they'll be 3-1 going into the first bye week. But yeah, that middle section really is going to define what their season is, because on paper, I think they have more talent than every team they play in October, save maybe Cal. Cal's probably going to be pretty comparable. That game's on the road, but they should have more talent on paper than Colorado State, Nevada, and maybe even UNLV. I think just top to bottom talent on the roster, because you mentioned that they lose a lot of guys. That is 100% true. It is a clean slate. It'll be the same thing that we talk about for Washington State here in a little bit, but they brought in a lot of Power 5 guys from the transfer portal, a lot of guys that were starting and contributing at high levels at the group of 5 level. I'm thinking about Kobe Singleton from Liberty. Is going to plug in nicely in the defensive backfield there. So I am really interested to see how that middle portion plays out. They could go 4-0 in that middle portion, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit. It also wouldn't surprise me if they go 1-3.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a world where they get to 8 wins. there's also a world where I think the Beavers are really struggling to get to a bowl game just because of how much new is there, right? I mean, it's not just coaching staff that they're having to turn over, it's everybody on that roster. I think I've been pretty consistent in saying if there's a team that's overturning like everybody, I'll take my ticket and wait for the next season on
Yeah.
them.
Well,
I love the energy that this program has. When I read about Oregon State, boy, they seem like they're fun. Boy, they seem like it's us versus the world. And oh, by the way, we've got $140+ million war chest from all you other losers that left the conference. Does it mean wins in year one? I don't know.
yeah, not sure about that. Well, and the thing too is they're going to have to find a way to just move the ball on offense. They've kind of been relying on Damian Martinez being the stud, and he was a stud for them. And but now I think it's at a point where we're going to have to find a way to kind of make him in the aggregate, right? Where you say like, hey, we'll piece some things together to create a sort of kind of Damian Martinez, and the defense should be good, so that'll put you in a good spot against a lot of these teams, especially if the talent disparity is big. You should be able to lock down some of these offenses from the Mountain West. It's just going to be about scoring. And you can kind of copy paste a lot of that onto Washington State if you guys want to talk about them for a second. Last year with Washington State, not as good as Oregon State's year. They go 5-7. They did have a couple of nice wins. They beat Wisconsin. That was pretty good. And then they did, kind of smoke Colorado towards the end of the season. They had a close win against their only remaining conference mate, Oregon State. So that's nice. They beat them by 3. But they kind of had a weird up and down. They started 4-0, and then they lost 6 straight before they blew out Colorado. So kind of needed to get right there. They had 5 losses by 10 points or less, and 3 of them were just by 3. So kind of a weird thing where a play here, a play there really would have saved their season and turned it around. So, they ended up on the drawing the short straw in a lot of situations last year. Maybe slightly better play from a couple things this year could turn that around. Obviously, great offensive system. They're very good at passing the football. They're the 4th best passing offense. They scored pretty good, too, 37th in the country. They did not run the football. It was 127th in rushing last year, so they do not run the football. And they just kind of play average to slightly below average defense. The big problem, though, is you said bye-bye to Cam Ward, and, that's a massive hit. He's a stud of a quarterback. You guys, I know, have been huge on him the last couple of years. I think he's going to do really, really, really good things at Miami. You say bye to him, you bring back 5 offensive starters, 4 of those guys on the offensive line. And so you got a lot of rebuilding to do. You should be able to block well, but who are you giving the ball to? Who's going to kind of be slinging it? I know John Mateer is kind of the guy at quarterback, but who around him is going to be the one to step up? They got some serious rebuilding to do. They're absolutely gutted on the defense as well. Only got 3 defensive starters coming back. Most of those guys are kind of upfront guys. I know their leading tackler comes back, the linebacker, but just about everything in the second level is toast. So losing a bunch of pieces there. They did do, I think, a couple interesting things in the portal. They brought in a couple of really good receivers, Chris Hudson, Kyle Maxwell, both guys who have caught a lot of passes from Oregon and Louisiana Tech, respectively. And they did bring in a defensive end, Cyrus Webster from Utah Tech, who had 5 sacks and 3 forced fumbles last year. So they're kind of hoping that he can be the answer off the edge, maybe, cause some havoc, create a little bit of chaos. But I think when you talk about Washington State, you kind of got to say, who's up next, right? Like, who's the next guy on offense? Who are my big studs? System should be good, but, can we run the ball this year? Are we going to try to run the ball this year? Or does that just not factor into our game plan? And then kind of how does the defense take a step forward, right? I think they got to find a way to play a little bit better defense. That should be helped by the schedule. Looking into their schedule a little bit, they play Portland State. They do play Texas Tech at home. That should be a fun one towards the beginning of the season. Another out-of-conference against their in-state rival. This is Washington. They play the Apple Cup at the beginning of September. That makes me feel a little uncomfortable. I don't really like it, but that's what it is. San Jose State at Boise. At Boise State, they get a bye week. Then it's Fresno State, Hawaii at San Diego State. Another bye week. Utah State at New Mexico. They play that conference game towards the end of the year at Oregon State, and then finish off with Wyoming. Again, kind of a similar thing to what Oregon State's going through. You have a little bit of a weaker schedule than you're used to, and they did play a lot of close games last year. maybe you flip some of those to dubs and you find your way back to 8 or 9 wins. That would be, I think, a big step in the right direction for Washington State, finding their way to some wins this year, trying to kind of reestablish themselves as a big-time program that a conference might want to snag.
I love that they kept their coaching staff together. I think that's the biggest difference between Washington State and Oregon State for me.
Mhm.
It's not starting over at square one in Pullman, and that's huge. I don't love the start of the schedule, and I think that's going to be really hard to build momentum. Conversely, I think Oregon State starts 3-1. I think Washington State might start 2-3 with losses to Washington and Texas Tech and Boise to start the year. I do think they'll beat Portland State and San Jose State, but it's going to be really rough to recover. And then, maybe one of the best teams in your kind of conference, not conference, comes calling after a bye week on the road. So it's a tough draw for Washington State, but like you said, they're used to tougher. And we'll see. I'm really intrigued by both of these teams. I think it's one of the most fascinating stories in all of college football. How do they handle all the off-the-field drama, and how do they put a good product on the field that's competing for something? I don't even know what you compete for. Like, you're not competing for a conference title, really. You're competing for a bowl game, and you're competing for personal and school pride. And I think that's really cool in an era that's kind of been passed by.
Listen, I think if John Mateer can go out and sling it, we might have to honor the Pirate. Maybe Mateer's Privateers is the fan club that we can launch. He's got a couple of really fun wide receivers he's going to be throwing to. I just don't know. I don't know what the ground game's going to look like for Wazoo. I think you could say that about them most years. And defensively, they just don't have a lot of starters back, right? Kyle Thornton is the guy in the middle of that defense. But we'll see. I'll tune in to watch some Wazoo football. I'm sure going to tune in to see Old Crimson waving as proudly as ever on game day. And just you heard it here first. Mateer's Privateers.
And I think the big thing, kind of capping off this little section here, is you really have to look at these two teams and say that you're not playing for a spot in the college football playoff. Probably it's hard to argue they're going to have the strength of schedule for that. You're probably not playing for anything really huge this year. You're playing for personal pride. You're playing for a little bit of maybe regional dominance. You are kind of playing a regional schedule, which is nice. It's not something that a lot of other teams this year are going to be able to say. And I think the big thing is just, you got to reestablish yourself, because the big offseason thing was just, you're looking at brands, right? You're looking at who's the big brand, who are we going to grab, who's going to realign like this, who's going to realign like that. You can't do that with these two teams. They got to kind of reestablish themselves and say, hey, we're worth taking a chance on, for whoever the next group is, or whoever ends up taking teams, or, whatever happens with the Big 12 and the ACC when they go kind of cannibalize each other. They want to be in a good position, right? Next time this thing comes along, you don't want to be, 6-6, 7-5, kind of sort of making it. You want to be in a really good spot to kind of take this thing up. And you want to be putting together 9, 10, 11 win seasons against lower competition to say, yeah, we're still pretty dang good. We're just going to try to make sure that, we can get this going forward. So it's not to say that there's no reason to watch this year. Lots of fun reasons to watch, but you gotta kind of take it from a bigger picture perspective and say, yeah, we may not be playing for the big trophy this year, but we can certainly do a lot.
Mateer's Privateers, baby. I'm in.
Let's do it.
I like that. That just came to me. I'm going to run with it.
We're going to do it.
Trey, you have got the Sun Belt, our final preview of 2024's preseason. Take us home, baby. What kind of contender status do you have in the conference? How did you sort through the Sun Belt, which is the lone FBS conference to retain divisions this year?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that off the top, because it is a little different. We have to talk about East contenders and West contenders. It's a little bit of a throwback in 2024 college football to still have divisions, but I love it. I love that the Sun Belt is holding on to that. I think it's great. And I think I've been on the record of this saying, I think within a few years, pretty much every other conference is going to return to divisions or pods of some sort to balance out the schedule, because they're going to see how stupid it is to not have them. So let's start with the East, because the Sun Belt East is pound for pound the toughest group of teams in all of Group of 5 football. I'm willing to say that. Sun Belt, just a little side note, came out on top of the SP Plus conference rankings for the G5 last year. They beat out the American in the preseason. They're number one again this year. But the problem as a whole, and it's probably going to keep them out of the college football playoff, is that parity. They have so many teams in that middle tier that can jump up and get the contenders on a given week that they're just going to probably accumulate too many losses. Maybe not. Maybe a team builds a good enough resume. Maybe someone runs the table. But these East contenders, I'll start with Appalachian State because that's the obvious one. They rebounded nicely. They had that honeymoon phase and just euphoric state a couple years ago where they beat Texas A&M. They win when game day in town on a Hail Mary. And then they kind of just went into hibernation for a long period of time. They finished 2022 6-6. They started 2023 3-4. Then all of a sudden, Joey Aguilar breaks out, becomes one of the top quarterbacks in the entire country. He finished 7th in the nation in passing yards last year, really led that offense to a resurgence, and they finished with 9 games, which is what they've been expecting their entire time in the FBS. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be more of the same on offense for Appalachian State. They do lose Nate Noel to Missouri, the good running back that ran for almost 1,000 yards last year, but it's going to be a passing attack led by Aguilar, led by the top 4 receiving targets that he has coming back. And I expect him to score a lot of points on the offensive side of the ball. The defense grew up a lot last year. They played a lot of young guys. They're bringing back 15 players who saw at least 200 snaps last year. So a ton of experience. Definitely expect a lot of the growing pains to be worked out. And they'll have some juniors and seniors on the field instead of freshmen and sophomores, which is just absolutely huge. So schedule-wise, they definitely have a schedule that if they take care of business, will set them up for the playoff. They're kind of another trendy pick, kind of up there with Boise State to take that G5 representation in the playoff. But I really like that they have tough out-of-conference games. They go to Clemson. Again, it's house money game. You're not going to get punished for losing that game in the eyes of the committee. And then they have a home game against Liberty that can literally set them apart for a team that they could be compared head-to-head against for that group of 5 playoff spot. So take care of business at home. That's going to be Liberty's only opportunity for a signature win all season. Take care of business at home. That's the name of the game. They do have a trip to Louisiana as one of their cross-division games, but other than that, they do have some nice home road splits that set them up pretty nicely.
I like that. I think App State is clearly the favorite at the top of the West, at the top of the East. But you mentioned that it's a deep side of the bracket, right, if you will. So James Madison, Georgia Southern, Marshall, Coastal Carolina, Georgia State, Old Dominion are the rest of that Eastern Division. How do you sort through those teams on a side of the conference that you feel like is defined by depth?
It is fascinating, man. Like I went back and forth. I decided to put 2 contenders from each division on in my preview article for the Sun Belt, and I went back and forth on pretty much like 3 or 4 different teams to be the second one in the East. I landed on James Madison, and if you've been following their offseason, if you've been tuned out since last season, you're like, of course it's James Madison. They won 11 games last year. But if you've been following their offseason, it has been just absolute turmoil over there in Virginia. So lose their coach, lose Kirk Cignetti, lose just about every key player from last year, quarterback, top 4 running backs, top 6 receivers. It's a mess with what they lost in the transfer portal. They bring in Bob Chesney from Holy Cross, and he immediately went to work in the portal. And this is why I have them as kind of slotted into the number 2 slot for right now in the Sun Belt East. They brought in 26 new players, and as many as 16 of them could be starting come week 1. And at least 16 will be in the 2 deep. All 16 could be starting. It starts with Dylan Morris, the former 4-star quarterback that was at Washington. They brought Ayo Ajayi from North Texas, really fun running back, brought a couple others in as well. They brought in 6 pass catchers. They just completely flipped the roster over, and they brought in some really quality guys that I think can fit the system. And I also really like the Chesney hire. He was at Holy Cross before. He knows how to win at a place where the odds are stacked against him. Holy Cross in the Patriot League, they have scholarship limitations that the rest of the FCS doesn't, and he took them to the playoffs and won games there consistently. So I'm excited. The schedule also does them a ton of favors. Their Power 4 game is going to North Carolina. I think They're definitely going to be the underdogs, but I don't think that that's just one that you Sharpie in as a loss with what we've seen from North Carolina the last few years.
Okay.
And guys, their opponents from the West are Southern Miss and Louisiana Monroe. So
Yeah, that helps.
that's 2 wins right there, most likely, if everything goes according to plan. Like you couldn't draw up a better conference schedule than that.
So James Madison gets your number 2 spot. Who were you kind of ping-ponging back and forth with? Or as Ty said, who were you kind of doing the pickleball offense with between James Madison and who?
So if you look at some of the preseason prognosticators, especially Phil Steele, he's really high on Marshall. And I had to look into it. I forgot that Marshall started 4-0 last year, and I really forgot that they went 8-4 or 9-4 a year before that. They had some really good talent in there, but they just kind of collapsed down the stretch. Everything really fell apart. They also lost their quarterback. They thought they had a guy coming in from Wake Forest that now decided that he's going to take his talents to a consulting firm or something like that. So it looks like Brayton Braxton from Tulsa is going to be the starter. It could be Colt Pennington, who was on the team last year. I just wasn't as confident in what they had bringing back. The offense only averaged 17.3 points per game down the stretch last year in their last 8 games. And just not enough. They didn't do enough in the portal to get me excited enough to put them in a contender tier. So I just kind of defaulted to James Madison.
Yeah, that was worse than East Carolina, who I could not believe only averaged like 17.6 points a game, I think, in a 2-10 campaign last year. And East Carolina has a much better defense than Marshall does. So Marshall's a fun team, but I think I agree with you on that ranking. So you've got what, 4 other teams on this side. What do you think about Coastal Carolina? They lose Grayson McCall to NC State. What are the Teal Chickens doing in 2024?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not often you lose a player that is literally like synonymous with your program, right?
Yeah.
Like Coastal Carolina, all due respect, was nothing before Grayson McCall and Jamie Chadwell came along. And you lost Jamie Chadwell last offseason. You lose Grayson McCall this offseason. They kind of got a preview of what that post McCall era is going to look like. Last year, he struggled with some injuries. He missed quite a bit of time down the stretch, but man, it's going to be interesting. I think they have some talented pieces. I think the offense is going to be decent. Noah Kim is going to come in from Michigan State and hope to kind of resurrect his career. But you just saw so many times that McCall was the guy covering up the warts of that team, be it a lack of talent on the offensive line, be it a defense that is just literal Swiss cheese, right? Like, Grayson McCall covered up for so many ills that Coastal Carolina had, and I'm just not sure they have. Noah Kim can be a serviceable quarterback. I think he's going to really benefit from the jump down in competition from the Big Ten, but I don't think he's a guy that can cover up all the warts of your team. They definitely have a ceiling of still going to a bowl game. I think they could win 7-8 games as a true ceiling, but it's going to be a lot tougher without McCall driving the engine.
Coastal's got a couple of really tough road games in conference too. They go to James Madison, they go to Troy. Just a lot new. Noah Kim, in his defense, 4-star quarterback out of high school, very highly coveted. Michigan State thought he was kind of the next guy.
They had their own problems there, like that were transcending Noah Kim. So he definitely he could have a full reset, right? We see that a ton of times with guys coming down from the Power 5 to the G5 level.
2 Georgia teams on this side, Georgia Southern, Georgia State. I think it's kind of unanimously agreed that Georgia Southern is probably the better team here. What do you like from the Eagles and the Panthers?
Yeah, I mean, kind of crossing over, I guess, a little bit. I'll talk about a couple of I'll lump Old Dominion and Arkansas State into this kind of tier discussion here, if that's fine. But this is where the depth of the Sun Belt really shows, right? They had 12 teams go to a bowl game last year. That was a conference record in an NCAA, an FBS high. And it was because Georgia Southern, Old Dominion, and Georgia State found a way to go to 6-6. And that's kind of been the dominating characteristic of their programs the last few years. I'll throw Arkansas State in there as well. They kind of surprised a lot of people by going 6-6. and making it to a bowl game. Now, that is why I love the offense at Georgia Southern. It's been amazing how they've gone from an option team to a spread it out, fun and gun team under Clay Helton so fast. That usually takes 3 or 4 years of transition. He did it in less than 2. And that's amazing. Georgia State has had a ton of talented guys come through on offense as well. They've been a receiver factory for a lot of Power 5 teams, but all these teams just find a way to go 6-6. And there's wins to be had on the schedule. They have to pick off a couple of the big dogs in the conference, but they've shown that they can do that. And that is an amazing thing for the Sun Belt when it comes to bowl revenue and getting more exposure for the conference and getting more teams into bowl season. It also will start to hurt them if those teams continue to give a bad loss or a questionable loss in the eyes of the committee to those top dogs.
We get the Georgia Southern Georgia State game early. That's at the end of September. And then it's not James Madison, Appalachian State that has to come to them. I believe the last week of the season, November 30th. It's going to be a fascinating game that will probably fly under the radar as far as rivalry week games. But it would be amazing if the Sun Belt East was somewhat determined in that final week of the season. You said Clay Helton squad, a lot of fun. Sean Elliott, one note for Georgia State, left during spring ball. He decided that being the tight ends coach at South Carolina was better than being the head coach of a group of 5 school. I know that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So Panthers may be playing from behind a little bit in 2024. Take me over to the West. Maybe not as deep. Certainly, I think a couple of those teams have maybe fallen off in recent years. I'm thinking of like South Alabama. Southern Miss has had hard times lately. But we've got a new power that's rising in the West. And Trey, they're one of my group of 5 contenders to make the playoff if all things break right.
Yeah, that's the key, right? And you're talking about Texas State, and man, just what a start for GJ Kinney.
There you go.
Man, like that's a program that was just an afterthought in the state of Texas. They couldn't get their own students to show up and stay at the games. They're way more interested in tailgating, going to the river, but they got them all back last year because they went 8-5. They made it to a bowl game for the first time ever, won a bowl game for the first time ever. They signed the top recruiting transfer portal class in the whole conference. They are rebuilding the recruiting inroads that were torn down by the previous regime in the Lone Star State. Everything is pointing up. And then the most fascinating thing to me is they almost threw it out the window in January when they took in Jaden DeLaura from Arizona. The students protested. And when they took in Jaden DeLaura, TJ Finley transferred, said, "I'm out of here." And then the students protest because of DeLaura's interesting pass. I'll just leave it at that. But he has a colorful pass and some controversy in his pass. The students protest.
Legal issue.
Yeah. And the students protest, and he has to unenroll from Texas State. So left without a quarterback, and he's like, okay, no worries. I'm just going to pull a rabbit out of my hat and go get the Sun Belt Player of the Year in Jordan McLeod from James Madison. So it really is all lining up, and it's an offense. I have no concerns about the offense. Jordan McLeod, he has the top 4 pass catchers back from last year, I believe. Top couple of running backs as well. Offensive line with multiple starters back. The offense is going to put up a ton of points on pretty much everybody they play. The defense is what's going to decide if they can actually win the Sun Belt West and go to the conference championship game. They're going to have a good pass rush. Defensive end Ben Bell actually graded higher per PFF last year than guys like Jared Verse and a couple other All-American defensive ends. He had a really good under the radar season last year. Defensive line as a whole is going to be a really big strength, but they've got to get the secondary figured out. They brought in a couple guys from the FCS that put up some nice numbers at a lower level, but they just got to stop blowing assignments. Time and time again, that's what set Texas State back last year. If they can figure that out, they're going to be the team to beat in the West.
Yeah, Texas State's defense was the enigma that, like, one week they could beat Baylor. The next week they'd get blown out by Arkansas State, and it was like, wait, what?
And their Achilles heel was teams with competent offensive lines, because if you had holes on your offensive line, that defensive line just tore them up. If you had a competent veteran offensive line, they could quell the pass rush long enough for the secondary to fall down or blow an assignment.
Yeah, offensively, Ishmael Miati, the running back, I think is going to be amazing. Joey Hobart uh, made Dave Campbell's Texas football's first team All Texas at the wide receiver position. He was crowned by the staff as the best wide receiver in the state of Texas. I don't know if that's going to stand as we go throughout the rest of the slate this year, but as far as like guy returning to Texas school, Hobart was back. Love that he doesn't wear gloves. He's just a gritty, salt of the earth kind of guy and making waves at Texas State. Talk to me about their schedule very quickly because UTSA is week 2. They get Arizona State week 3, a bye week, and then they play a team like Sam Houston State in Houston. It's a fascinating schedule for the Bobcats this year.
Yeah, they don't have to leave Texas, the state of Texas, for non-conference play. How many times does a G5 team not have to leave their own state for non-conference play, or a Sun Belt team? I didn't do the research, but I'm pretty sure they're probably the only team in the conference that doesn't have to leave their state to go play a bye game somewhere. They play Arizona State at home. They're actually favored in that game. If you look at the SP Plus, so it's not really an upset if they win that one. The toughest one's going to be UTSA. Big rivalry game, I-35 battle. It's at home. They haven't beaten UTSA in a while, I do believe. So that's the key litmus test early in the season to see how far this thing can go. The conference schedule is interesting. They have bookend road trips to Troy and South Alabama. A couple teams I'll talk about in a little bit. They're going to be maybe a little bit down this year, but that's their opener and their closer respectively. But they get Louisiana at home. They draw Old Dominion and Georgia State from the East. You could certainly do a lot worse than that.
Yep.
It sets up really nicely for them.
Yeah, Louisiana off a bye as well.
It's a Tuesday night game, so it's like a mini bye, but yeah, you get a little extra time to prepare for that one.
Yeah, I love it. I think Texas State, boy, if they could go 10-2, certainly if you find a way to beat UTSA, boy, sky might be the limit for Kenny and the boys. Take me elsewhere in the West. Like, who else do you have contending? Is it very chalky over there? I know that a lot of people have the West kind of ordered very specifically, but what else draws your eye?
Yeah, I have Louisiana penciled in at number 2 right now as a kind of a co-contender. I think the winner right now, as we sit in late August, I think the winner of that Texas State Louisiana game will probably go on to win the West. And that's because of a couple of things. I mentioned South Alabama and Troy, both with new coaches that I'll talk about in just a second. But Louisiana, they've kind of been building for the first couple of years under Michael DeSormo. Billy Napier brought them to a huge high watermark a couple of years ago before he left for Florida. But I think DeSormo finally kind of has the team that he wants. And he did lose his starting quarterback to Houston's Zeon Chris, but they have a lot of experience at the position. I think they're going to try to find an identity running the football anyways and passing when they have to. And they had a really solid offensive output the last couple of years when they had guys like Chandler Fields running the show a couple of years ago. So I'm high on them from a continuity standpoint. I think 15th nationally in returning production. They bring a ton of guys back in a division that's going to be in flux early on. They catch some teams while they might still be trying to figure it out. The defense needs to step up a little bit. They're another team. I think I mentioned Appalachian State earlier, team that had a lot of freshmen and sophomores on the field the last couple of years, and now those guys are junior and seniors. So guys like Jordan Lawson at the defensive tackle position, Cameron Whitfield at the edge, got a talented secondary with some nice additions from the Power 5 level. They have the continuity, I think, to make a run. The schedule's interesting. Play in-state rival Tulane at home. They go to Wake Forest, so definitely a winnable Power 4 game. And if they win both of those, it's going to be a lot of momentum building before the conference slate. But if they're going to make it back to the conference championship game, it is the opening section of conference games that's going to decide that. They got to survive going to Hattiesburg, not the most difficult place to play in recent years. But after that, they have App State at home, at Coastal, and then play that Texas State game on a Tuesday night following a bye. So 3 of their first 4 conference games are difficult to quite difficult.
Tell me about Troy and South Alabama, 2 teams that were used to contending in the West, but both have new coaches this year. Kane Womack is now at Alabama as the defensive coordinator. He's wearing hoodies during fall camp in 105-degree heat. Troy loses their head coach to Tulane. So where do those folks, as far as the Trojans and the Jaguars, where do they slot in this year?
It's so sad to say because they've been at the top of the conference standing. Troy's won the conference the last 2 years, and South Alabama has been so plucky. They upset Oklahoma State on the road last year. South Alabama is 125th in returning production, and Troy is 131st. So Gerard Parker and Major Applewhite, the new coaches, just have a ton of unanswered questions going into this year, and that's what they're going to be defined by. I think Troy's still going to be defined by running the football, getting a lot of production from their running backs and their ground game. South Alabama, I think, is going to want to open it up and run a little bit more wide open offense with Major Applewhite running the show. But there's just so many unanswered questions for me to be confident about anything. And Texas State and Louisiana just have a lot more continuity, and I think they're going to get off to a hotter start. Both I think both can make a bowl game. Absolutely. But
Sure.
Pushing for a conference title, this might be too difficult of a start to the season to ask for that.
Hey, shout out Goose Crowder, starting quarterback named at Troy. What a name. I'm rooting for him all year. I think making a bowl game for sure for Troy. South Alabama, I think we're going to learn a lot when they play North Texas. Is that week 1? That might be week 1 or week 2.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have the schedule in front of me, but that sounds right.
Yeah. So I think we're going to learn a lot about the Jaguars early. Major Applewhite's team, as you mentioned earlier. Anything else from the Sun Belt? Anyone else here? I know ULM. You mentioned Arkansas State.
Tate Rodemaker's the quarterback at Southern Miss. That's interesting.
Sure.
General Booty's the quarterback at ULM. That's going to be fun. But there are a couple teams that are just really searching for answers and looking for progress this year. I think they're a couple years away from contention. Keeping at it, just wash, rinse, repeat. Start your dynasty with them in college football 25 if you want to challenge.
Yeah, gosh, like Southern Miss just struggling to even get to 4 or 5 wins the last couple of years. That surprised me when I was doing some research just over their recent past. ULM, like the second they have anybody worth their salt, like they transfer out. So it's
hard,
a new
man.
era.
Like once you get to the bottom of some of these G5 conferences, it is so hard to pull yourself back up unless you just get a generational talent at quarterback and convince him to stay for 3 or 4 years and figure it out. There's no rest for the weary.
Yeah. Or find one thing that your program does well and recruit that out of the portal when inevitably your starter leaves, right?
And I mean, like, there's talent in Mississippi and Louisiana, and there's a bunch of guys. The problem with Louisiana so much is the best guys are going to go to LSU, so you don't get the transfer back home benefit that maybe like a Texas State or a North Texas or a Sam Houston might get. Like, you convince some guys that went off to come back home. But, man, it's just so difficult once you get down to get back up.
I'm excited about the Sun Belt, man. This is fun. Again, I said this off the top. We did more research than we ever have this year in year 3 of the podcast. We wrote our own previews. I think we've done a really good job breaking it down for you guys, the fans, the listeners, the watchers on YouTube. And I am legitimately excited about like every single team this year, no matter if you're going to be really good and contend for a national title, or you are trying to get, personal victories, get to 4 or 5 wins and show some semblance of progress in year 1, year whatever it is at your program. Like, there are storylines across the country, and that is why I'm so excited about this year. I can't wait. 6 days, man. 6 days. I know a lot of people don't count week 0. I don't get that argument. You're famous for saying all football is good football. We believe that here at the 3 Tech.
Yeah, and you're really going to complain that we have games on the TV after you've been waiting since January? Like, what are we doing? Like, these are the same people that say we have too many bowl games. And what else are you doing on a Tuesday night in December, man? You're going to your company Christmas party and hating every second of it? Like, grow up. Just grow up.
Well, on that note, Trey offering free life advice. We will say goodbye until next time. For Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks so much for tuning into our final preview of the season. Our next episode, we will break down our conference champion predictions, give you our 12 teams we think will make it to the college football playoff. And we'll talk a little week 0 football as well, because that is right around the corner. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Until Thursday morning, so long, everybody.
Gracious, how about